Hello, are you here to debate?
Hi, yes, I am.
Okay, can I get your name, age, and pronouns, please?
Yes, Dwayne, 37, he, him. Not a
Okay.
big fan of the pronoun stuff, but that's not my topic for today.
Okay. Well, Dwayne, what topic are you calling to debate about?
The Christian God is evil and not real.
Okay. Dwayne, are you a Christian? And if so, what denomination are you currently?
I am a Christian, non-denominational. I think I kind of fall under like a category of like Christian rationalist. I was raised Catholic, though I kind of turned away for a while. And I think Jordan Peterson kind of helped me a lot in putting things in more like concrete. I like how he talks about things in biological terms. And so it kind of helped me understand a lot of the philosophy and also concrete aspects to it. And then, that kind of led me to thinking more about whether or not God is actually real outside of like a philosophical framework.
Okay. Sure, no problem. Just some things to get out of the way before we start the conversation. Do you agree that the God of the Christian Bible, do you believe that the Christian Bible in its entirety is a faithful representation of God and God's will?
Yes, I don't necessarily believe in Bible inerrancy, but I do believe that the Bible is the word of God, divinely inspired, written by man.
Okay, so if the Bible gives a doctrine in the form of rules and laws that God says what is or is not moral, you would say that these are things that would be true, not necessarily a lot of the other things, but like what God's will is essentially per the Bible would be.
I would say yes.
Okay, great. Do you also believe that God is all-knowing, all-powerful, all-seeing, and all-good?
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. Great. So then I'll just give you my interpretation. I believe that God cannot be a good being. I believe God has caused too much untold suffering. I believe that when we look at the way God has engaged with humanity from our inception, he doesn't really want us to prosper. He wants us to suffer, and he allows for generally evil things to happen. I think a God that allows for evil things to happen, that's not a God that I would say is all good.
That makes sense. I actually was talking to my wife about this last night.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this idea that there is good and evil in the world. And I was thinking about Buddhism and how it kind of strives for this kind of centeredness. You don't want to be, too much on any end,
Mm-hmm.
You're just going for that kind of, no emotion kind of thing. And, I think that that's a nice thing, but it kind of illustrated to me that, if you don't have evil, you can't have good. If you don't have sadness, right, you can't have happiness, because that's how we experience it. And I guess in theory, God could have created the world for us to, just constantly, be in a state of bliss. But, I think for me, that comes down to a question of free will and what are we doing here? And if there is a greater purpose to whatever we're doing here and serving God, then it makes sense that we would have a free will, and we would be, we would be able to, commit evil, but not that is something from God or, of God that he points to and would consider good and what he wants us to do.
Yeah, sure. So my contention with this, when we get into stuff like free will, I don't believe that a God who is all-knowing, all-seeing, all-powerful would, like, free will wouldn't exist in a world with that God, right? Because what we're saying is this is a God who has, at the dawn of time, predetermined everything that would happen, because like he pre-saw all courses of action. And because he's all knowing, he saw exactly what would happen every time. So me and you are on a predestined path, and no decision we make can break from that predestined path. I don't consider that free will. I think it's an illusion of free will. We think we have a choice, but our choices were determined for us thousands of years, millions of years before we were created, you know? The other issue with this is you had mentioned you don't think God necessarily made evil and whatnot. I would say he explicitly says he does in the Bible. He says, I created all things, the good and the evil. We know that, like, for instance, Adam and Eve had no knowledge of what evil or what really bad things were, right? Because they hadn't eaten from the tree that had the knowledge of that there. So I would say that he definitely is the one who created evil and put it into the world. And if he wanted a world in which, at least I believe, because he's all powerful, he could have created a world in which the rules of the universe made it so that we had free will, but we didn't have to deal with unnecessary suffering, or like in a sense like that. And I think because he didn't do that, he would be an evil being.
I think I understand what you're saying, and I feel like that assumes that we know why we're here or what we're doing or what he wants for us, you know, when it's all said and done. You know, so like we don't really have any understanding and can't really have any understanding of that. And so the way I look at it is just more of like the fact that we are here, these things, you know, do exist in the world, and that there is a rationality for it. And to just say that, you know, because God is all knowing and he would do these things, you know, if he were, you know, all good and all knowing, I think that has an assumption that we know, you know, why we're here and what his plan is for us. And
yeah, sure.
So
my issue with that is when we talk about God's will, like you're saying, like we don't understand what God's will is, sure, but we know that God has a will, and per the Bible, everything that happens is in accordance with God's will. Nothing happens that God doesn't want to happen, right? So if everything that happens is according to God's will, how can we really have free choice? How can we really have free will? I can't do an action that goes against the will of God. And he knows exactly what action I'm going to do. God essentially, at the dawn of time, at the beginning of the creation of the world, or at the beginning of the creation of time, right? When God created time, at that moment, he basically watched a movie, right? He watched a movie of all of time all at once. Now imagine you sit down and you watch, I don't know, pick a movie, Forrest Gump. Like imagine you sit down and you watch Forrest Gump. Every time you watch that movie, Forrest will always run. Forrest can't make another choice. That movie, what Forrest's actions in that movie are they're predetermined. Forrest has an illusion of choice when you're watching the movie, right? But like God has seen the movie, and if he hits rewind and watches it again, we will always make the same choices. Now, I do believe if you were to tell me like, hey, God is all seeing, but he is not all knowing. He sees all the choices we can make, but doesn't know which one we are going to make. Totally different scenario here. I would actually say free will exists under this God, because he gets surprised by us all the time, but God isn't surprised, and God is all powerful, so he has to be all knowing.
Yeah, I think it's a third scenario where, where basically, you know, God is all seeing and all knowing, as far as he knows everything that is, and he knows all of the outcomes that could be, but you know, there's still the free will aspect where we could go one way or another. And I don't think that life is necessarily a movie that you could replay, right? And it's not like, you know, like
we can't, but God can. Path. Well, but that's what I'm saying. But that's going to be the difference. If he is all knowing, that means he does know which path we're going to take with 100% certainty. And he knew which path we were going to take with 100% certainty well before we took the path, right? So that means there can't be, the free will is just an illusion, right? Because let's say I drop my Apple Pencil right now onto the floor. God knew I was going to drop this Apple Pencil thousands of years ago. No decision I make is going to wind up with me not dropping that Apple Pencil. I will drop it 100% of the time. That's not free will. I can't make a choice that God doesn't know. I can't make a choice that God didn't know thousands of years before I was born. All my choices, God saw them all and knew exactly which one I would make. This is again why I like to liken it to a movie. And you can even take it a step further. God directed the movie, because when God created the world, he knew exactly what actions would partake in the world. So he could have created the world and made things slightly different. He could have done that, but he didn't, because he wants, per his will, everything to wind up the way it does. Now, whether we want to say, like, at the end of it all, that's going to be good or bad is a different conversation. But we do know that we're all, if the Christian God is real, we are all following in his predetermined plan. We cannot break from that plan. And in fact, no being can break from that plan.
Yeah, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. It's something I want to take away and do some research from on this, because I can definitely see how, if you're saying that, God knows all, he's all knowing, but we have free will, like, how does that leave room for the devil to, persuade you to commit evil, right? It does seem like there's kind of a conflict there.
Well, and then you gotta take it a step further, Dwayne. You have to take it a step further, because who created the devil? If God didn't want the devil to be able to influence us, he just didn't have to create him, right? Because we see in the Bible, at least, we see God be, I won't say mournful, but we see him get kind of ticked off with things that humans do. I mean, he regrets making humans so much that he floods the earth to get rid of them. But he knew at the dawn of creation that we were going to do the things to piss him off. So, like, if you're all powerful and you're going to get so mad at the things you create that you're going to wipe them out, why not just set it up so that they don't do those things in the first place? And the evil thing, God could do that without affecting our free will. He could stop us from committing evil without affecting free will by just showing up and saying, hey guys, it's me, God. If you do evil, I send you to hell. If I saw God appear in the sky and it was legitimately God, and he told me, if you do X, Y, and Z, I'm sending you to hell for all eternity, I probably wouldn't do X, Y, and Z. That's still my choice. I could make the choice to do it. But, like, he slightly threatens us, but doesn't prove the threat. So just, in my opinion, just seems contradictory.
I definitely see what you mean. I guess one thing that doesn't quite resonate is that the fact that, just because he's all-seeing and all-knowing means that, we don't have free will. I mean, it doesn't seem contradictory in my mind that he could know everything but still give us space to play out things in a way to make the right choices that would basically qualify us for, whatever is beyond this.
Let me give you a different analogy. And see what you think. Does an NPC in Grand Theft Auto have free will? They're making decisions that are randomized. They're making decisions like NPCs in a game I wouldn't even go Grand Theft Auto. Look at NPCs in a game like Red Dead, which is like a generation above. They're making randomized choices, but me and you both know that those choices come from a list of predetermined things that they can do, right? I would say if God has seen all of our choices, we're just picking from a list. And he knows, based on the parameters, exactly which one of that list we're picking from.
So the way I see that kind of analogy, in good faith trying to find, an understanding is, we would be more like the players, where the game developers are all-seeing and all-knowing for the game, but we still come in and are able to make certain decisions in the game.
This, I would agree with you if it was the case that we could make decisions God can't account for, or that God doesn't see happening. Because, right, I can do something in a game that devs did not plan for. That's how we break boundaries. And that's how, that's speed running, right? Is most of the time speed running is doing things in a game that the game devs never accounted for. But we can't do any of that under God.
Well, even if you took out speed running and any kind of hacks and you just played the game how the developers intended, there is still kind of, a near infinite, number of things that you could do in the game and choices that you could make that are still within the framework of what quote unquote God set up. And, again, the goal being to play the game properly. If you play the game properly, you're able to, ascend. And if you don't, you descend.
I understand what you're saying, and I get it, but I would say as long as the devs can't know for certain what you're going to do, it's going to be different, right? Like, I agree with you. There is a near infinite amount of choices you can make when playing a video game, right? Just like there's a near infinite amount of choices that we make all throughout our lives. But infinite as a concept is not something God worries about. Right? Infinite doesn't exist to God because he's an all powerful being. He knows exactly what you're going to do. So he knows every choice you make. And I just feel like if you are, the movie thing is really my best example. Like if you know for a fact that at the end of Toy Story, Woody and Buzz are always going to be reunited with Andy, do they have a choice when they're doing that? Like, when you're watching that movie, do those characters have a choice? They just have an illusion of the choice. We're like a movie to God. He's just watching us. He's watching something play out, and it will always play out the same way.
Yeah, but he would still have the ability to set up a constrained environment where we do have free choice. Because if there is free choice and he knows all possible decisions, but he still leaves it up to us, for whatever his plan is to be able to navigate those decisions, in essence, proving ourselves, then I don't see how that conflicts with the idea of him being all seeing, all knowing, and us still having free will.
Because again, is it free will? Like, let's pretend you have a time machine, right? Like, pretend you have a time machine and you can go back in time to this morning. You could theoretically choose to eat a different breakfast, right? Like if you ate Frosted Flakes, you could go back in time and instead eat toast, right? Now, God can essentially view time differently than we view time. So God can view past and present whenever he wants. Can we ever make a different choice under God? Under God's view of time? We can't. We will always choose Frosted Flakes. Even if God goes and looks back again and says, well, I'm going to go look back at this morning, or I'm going to look forward, and then I'm going to look forward again like a week later. We're still always going to choose the Frosted Flakes. We're never choosing anything different. We don't have the ability to. That's why I say it's more of an illusion of choice, right? We never have the ability to make a choice separate of what God sees and wants, because it's all to his will. No one can make a choice that God does not want them to do.
Yeah, but that assumes a linearity to time, and that, we understand how that whole, space is,
well,
designed and how it
for
functions.
us, time is linear. So every time God has shown, because God doesn't stop being all seeing just because he materializes on earth, right? When God shows up to Moses as the burning bush, right? God still has his power to all see, all know. So for that time while he's sitting in one spot in our linear timeline, he sees our timeline as linear.
Yeah, but we're talking about 4 dimensions, and I mean, in theory, there could be 5. But again, we're getting into
Possibly
things where we.
But what I'm saying is, if he materializes in our time, right, at a fixed point in our time, that creates a linear branch for his seeing and his knowing.
But all of this is in a space where we're just kind of like theorizing, and it's not necessarily based on what we're experiencing.
Sure,
here,
if you want to,
in the same way that you say that, they could say that in theory there could be multiple dimensions with multiple timelines in our
possibly.
But again, that's just.
If you want to instead look at the actions God takes or things like that, as opposed to looking at the philosophy behind his power to look at whether he's evil. Or I can even take, well, it depends. I know that you said that when it comes to the Bible, you know, you're more focused on the word of God and whatnot. But like, do you believe in the story of Moses? Do you believe that was a thing that happened?
Yes.
Okay. So then let's analyze this. If we have free will, why did God remove Pharaoh's free will and then punish all of the people of Egypt for that?
Do you have a little bit more information on how he removed the Pharaoh's free will?
Absolutely. When God shows up to Moses as the bush, he specifically says to Moses, you're going to go to Pharaoh. You're going to ask him to free your people. I'm going to harden his heart so that he says no. And then we're going to do the plagues. So the subtext to this is God saying, when God says, I'm going to harden his heart so that he tells you no, if the Pharaoh's heart was already hardened and the Pharaoh was already going to say no, God would have no need to do this. God is only hardening his heart so that no becomes the answer. So after Pharaoh then says no, God then does the plagues, one of which is killing all of the firstborn children in Egypt. It seems complete opposite of good, in my opinion, to force someone into a decision and then punish everyone around that person for that decision you forced them into. And if you'd like the specific verse, I can pull it up for you.
No, that makes sense. When I think about those kind of stories in the Bible, I try to understand, what it could mean in like a practical sense, because a lot of times, it's consolidated into a story and they're not exactly going to, go into kind of breaking things down in a more detailed way. But, when I see things like that, I think that they are true stories that illustrate, a fact of kind of how things will play out, given certain circumstances. And that reflects God's nature because, the world, we're made in the image of God. And so if you're following God and you're following his way, Moses, was one of the few people who was considered walking with God. It would make sense to me that he was aligned with the world and God in a way that would basically, I don't know the right word for it, but these kind of things would happen. So if you have somebody like a Pharaoh in a position of power that's committing a lot of evil, and you have certain people following him, I think there's a difference between evil and sin, right? And a lot of punishment that happens to people is a result of sin, which is often led astray by evil. But I think that in those situations, what I see is a pattern of being in the world and cause and effect that reflects God's nature. And if you are walking with God, then you are going to naturally kind of be able to affect those things more because you just have that alignment.
But here's my issue with this. One, we kind of have to take the Bible at its word for what it says God says, right? So like specifically in Exodus, we have direct quotes of what God said to Moses when he appeared to Moses and told Moses to let his people go. So these are direct quotes. Now we can say they're mistranslated and all that. Then I get into like, well, what in the Bible do we actually believe? Like at that point, if we're not going to take the Bible at its face, if we're going to say like, hey, people misinterpret the Bible and retranslate it into different ways, which I agree does happen. But if that's the case, then we really can't use the Bible for any sort of claim at all, right? So if we're taking the Bible's claim at its face, the Bible, and this is Exodus, what is it? Exodus 4, verse 21. When God is talking to Moses, he says, and I quote, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders I have given you the power to do. So he's saying, I'm going to give you power. I'm going to give you godlike power. You're going to perform these godlike power things to the Pharaoh to prove yourself. This will prove to the Pharaoh that you and I have spoken and that I have given you power as prophet, right? He then says, and I quote, "But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go." So first of all, he's sending Moses on a completely pointless task. He's then hardening the Pharaoh's heart. Like there is no other way to interpret this except for when he says, so that he will not let people go. There's no way to interpret this except for, had he not done that, Pharaoh would have let Moses and the people go. He would have believed Moses because the Pharaoh and Moses had a close relationship, and he would have let Moses and his people go. And then my bigger issue from here is, now that God has done this, he then is going to kill a bunch of innocent children because of an action he did. So my issue with my overall issue with that is, how are we like, why would I worship or believe that a being that does this is a good being?
Yeah, I think that's fair. So my interpretation of that, like, I don't believe that God like reaches into time and space and affects things, like he would, like consciously, harden his heart, right? I think in that story, what I see is that, God is communicating to Moses through the way that he communicates to everybody, which, I understand as your conscience, the ego being more associated with the devil. So what I read that story interpreted as is, these are truths that God, through Moses's conscience are being revealed to him, right? So, I've given you these powers, right? He has these powers because God, being a representation of the values and what is right in the world, being that Moses is so aligned with God, he is able to receive that divine revelation through conscience and understand that in this moment in time, given these circumstances, God is going to harden the Pharaoh's heart. And it's my responsibility to go to this place and bring this power that's been bestowed upon me by God. And then there's the question of all the kids being destroyed, killed, which I think is a tragedy. And we have a lot of those situations in the Bible that I certainly don't know how to think about them. And it's definitely one of the things that does make me stop and pause and wonder, like, why? But until I can have, like, some type of answer, is in the negative, like, I don't know. I don't see that as disqualifying, but I do see it as a tragedy. And I understand why it makes a lot of people, not want to believe that this could be true.
Well, so I do disagree when it comes to God. I don't disagree that God gave Moses revelations, but I think there's a difference between God giving Moses revelations so that Moses can, like, see the divine and Moses can have all of these. And I think there's a difference between that and between him legitimately saying, I did X, right? Like, if he says, I did this thing, and God doesn't lie, God, what's one of the, I believe he lies all the time, but one of the things about God per the Christian text is that God tells only truths. Like, truth is essential to his being. If God doesn't lie and he says, I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go, I'm going to take that on face value. I'm going to believe that that's what God is saying, right? Because truth is in his nature. So then if this is the case, I believe, which I believe he does all the time, punishes innocents for things they did not do or things that he did. He does this a bunch.
So I don't think that, obviously we don't have any evidence that, God actually, reaches into the world and does things. But when we do have direct, when he showed up to Moses as the burning bush, he reached into the world and set a bush on fire. So I believe that God is reflected in, everything in the world, but he's not here. Right. And so when when I hear that God did something, whether he talked to Moses in the burning bush or he hardened the Pharaoh's heart, what I'm hearing is that the natural order that reflects him, did those things, so he did those things, right? Because nature reflects that. And so, yeah, I mean, that's my interpretation.
But he still did it. That's the thing, is he still is punishing Pharaoh for something he did. He's punishing all of Egypt for something he did.
Yes. And so, for me, when I'm trying to reconcile that, which, something like this, I definitely can't say that I have fully reconciled it. But my current understanding is that, that there is a right way to be in the world and that there's a wrong way to be in the world. And that's, that's defined by what sin is. And so, when, for example, a civilization like the Pharaohs, goes too far in committing sin, there are a lot of consequences, and people who didn't necessarily even partake in that sin, certainly could be hurt by the fallout of that. So,
but again, God created the sin. God creates sin. There's nothing that exists that, by the way, and this brings me back to our original point. There's nothing that exists in this universe that God did not create, and there's nothing that happens in this universe that God does not will. So,
right, but there would be nothing to experience, and there'd be no reason to be here if we didn't have free will. And so, with that free will, he's given us space to actually, exercise that. And there are consequences where, there's tragedy and suffering, and I definitely agree with what you said about.
He's willing to turn off our free will and punish us anyway if we do that's a cruel God. If you say you have free will, you have free will to make the right choices, but I will shut off your free will and then punish you for making the wrong choice, I don't think that's a good thing.
Well, I think that the story of Moses, that did reflect free will, and Moses was somebody who was, walking with God, and the Pharaoh arguably was exercising his free will in a way that was very sinful. And so Moses, being somebody who was walking with God and aligned with his will, acting in that way, basically, that's what God did, right? So, yeah.
The only problem I have with this is we have no idea what Pharaoh would have done had God not interfered. We don't know. We genuinely don't know. Had God not hardened Pharaoh's heart, what choice Pharaoh would have made.
So for me, that sounds similar to saying like if you, this is an extreme version of it, but like, if you, no, that's not a good way. No, I don't have a good example to counter that. Yeah, nah, sorry, I don't know.
All right. Well, we've been chatting for about 30 minutes, so I'm going to move on to another caller. But Dwayne, thank you for calling in, and thank you for chatting.
Thanks, you too. Bye.
Have a good one. Oh, look at that. We don't have any callers. It looks like all the conservatives are scared. Hey, thank you all for watching this video. If you don't know me, I'm Jovan Bradley. I'm a leftist content creator who does debates, political commentary, gaming, and more. If this is your first video, thanks for sticking to the end, and I hope you subscribe. I post videos daily, and there are hundreds of past debates on my page for you to enjoy. Thank you to all of my YouTube members. Your continued support helps me create as much as I can. Consider joining. A membership starts at $2.99 and gets you access to our community Discord, early access to videos, and more. Shout out to my Tier 4 members, Ovaltine, Sylvia Snow, Bamji, Emery Imogene, Ayla Ursus, Zurith Moonpaw, Vel, Kelsey K, Jake Gorshander, Matthew Holloway, Kazim, Vampy, Yemye, and Dragon Nerd. Your continued support goes a long way to me continuing the fight for equity, justice, and education. Thank you again for watching.